I think it needs to be more aesthetic here. Give me a second. Much better. That's just, yep, perfection. Alright, let's get started. I think this next one is perhaps going to be the first controversial camera that I bring up. And it is this gorgeous Rolleiflex, I think K4 model TLR. And if you're not familiar with TLRs, there's one big difference on the front that makes this unique to other cameras. The viewing lens and the taking lens. And this is both its greatest strength and its greatest weakness. So there's lots of cool mythos about these things. You know, lots of famous photographers have used these, and it's kind of easy to see why. So two of the big names that I kind of think are great are, one, Vivian Maier, and she sort of made Rolleiflex cool again, even though she passed away and didn't show her photos to people during her lifetime. But it's kind of like one of the coolest photographers because she did it for herself. Very interesting, read up on her, great. The other is Robert Capa. Now, I like Robert Capa because he had such an interesting life. His photos are great, obviously. And he was another notable Rolleiflex user. I think there's also a photo of Stanley Kubrick with a Rolleiflex. I'm not sure if it was his. I don't know if he had strong opinions on them. But yeah, lots of famous people use these. The problem is it won't make your photos as good as theirs. Unlike most cameras, unfortunately, it's down to the user to get that bit right, which might explain why this one's going to leave my collection. Okay, so the real reason why this one's going to leave my collection, and it's very simple, and it's this thing. This is how you actually set up and use the camera, and when you look down into the viewing plane, up and down is correct, but left and right isn't. That can cause you a lot of headaches when you're just setting it up and getting used to it. It's a bit weird because I occasionally use view cameras, and I find them more intuitive to use than this thing. I think it's because both axes are wrong in a view camera, whereas there's only one axis that's wrong in the Rolleiflex. So I thought I would just explain this a little bit more by actually going out in the field. And this is the view you get straight down the viewfinder, down the waist level viewfinder as they call it. And you can see as I move around, sort of everything's the wrong way around. You've also got this thing which kind of makes it a little bit more like a view camera. Speaking of, and that's the view you get inside the view camera. But if you can get over that, there's probably a wealth of like really good cameras for not a huge amount of money that you can get. This camera here, even though it has the legendary Rolleiflex branding on it, is not that expensive, and that's because this one isn't automatic, it doesn't have a light meter, it's incredibly basic, it's quite old. But it's very simple, although I bet at the time these were incredibly expensive. And one of the reasons is because it doesn't have a ruby window here. So what you would do, usually with cameras of the same era, is you open it up. There's a lovely film chamber in here. You take your film and you go from the bottom, you put it over here, and often there's a little start arrow, and then you close it up, and you align with a red little ruby window, as they call it, and you roll on the film, and then you see like a 1 come into view, and then you know you're at the first shot. This has none of that. This has magic. You just put the film in, you start winding it on, it knows exactly where to start, and it has a frame counter. So none of your photos are ruined by having the red window leak too much light through it, or load it in too bright of light and then you get like a weird black streak on it because somehow the light went through the red window and caused half of your film to be exposed. So this would have been absolutely revolutionary compared to a lot of other medium format cameras at the time. Although when this came out, I have a sneaking suspicion that medium format was sort of just normal format, and 35mm would have been sort of the more unusual exotic one. So while editing, I looked around my desk and saw that one of the cameras I had laying around does have a ruby window. So this might explain it a little bit better. It's not the easiest thing to see, but it's this little red spot here. Might be able to see that. Anyway, it's a little piece of red glass, and in a lot of these cameras, the film would be spooled up and over around, and on the edge of a piece of 120 film, it has markings for frame numbers. Anyway, the other reason why I'm getting rid of this, and to be fair, it's probably the real reason why I'm getting rid of this, is because some time ago, I actually bought a Fuji GA645, which is a medium format rangefinder. And in the short time I've owned it, I put more rolls of film through that thing than I did this. And I think it's just because I enjoy it more. It was a bit of a risk because it was the first rangefinder I've ever bought, and it was a medium format rangefinder. While I've had this camera for more than a decade, I think I've only put about 4 rolls of film through it. And I think that's just because I don't really enjoy the workflow. I don't really enjoy the use of this camera. And so when I got the Fuji, within about 3-6 months, I'd put as many rolls through that as I had through this in the entire time I owned it. So that kind of told me that there's something about just the experience of this that doesn't mesh with me. And again, the whole point of the series is, just because this camera doesn't work for me, doesn't mean it won't work for you. This particular unit was once actually owned by a professional photographer. Shocking, I know, I'm not a professional. But this was used to do studio portraiture for many, many years. It's been dropped and repaired, and incredibly well used. That's why it's a little bit loose and a little bit shabby around the edges. It's even missing some bits and had some questionable repairs. But this thing is good enough for professional use. Well, okay, you might not want to start up a studio and use it for professional shots today, but it absolutely is an extremely high quality camera, particularly the Zeiss lens. People love these lenses. They worked incredibly well, and those who know how to use them can really get a lot out of them. So, while this one is going to leave my collection, and it will be a little bit sad, because it was the first medium format camera I ever used, and TLRs are always exciting. Whenever you take one of these out, people always ask you questions about it, like, can you still get film for it? But because I have another camera, and I know I enjoy using it so much more than this thing, unfortunately, this one's going to have to go, but I hope somebody else has it and loves it more than I ever did.